can use C# to perform mathematical calculations, and it's very good at doing that. So here's our problem. We have a right triangle. We know the lengths of sides A and B, which are the two shorter sides. I need to calculate what is the length of side C. And thinking back on your high school geometry class, you may recall that in the Pythagorean Theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared in a right triangle. And therefore, c equals the square root of a squared plus b squared. In this particular case, if a is 4 and b is 3, then a squared is 16 and b squared is 9. So 16 plus 9 is 25. And of course, the square root of 25 is 5. And so we know the value of the length of side C is 5. We can represent that in code a couple different ways. So I can take the a squared, which is the same as a times a, and add that to b times b, which would be b squared, taking that whole value inside the parentheses here and using math.square-root, SQRT. Alternatively, I can also say math.pow and specify a value that I want to raise to an exponent, which is this case again is a squared plus b squared. And if I raise that to a value of 1/2, that is the same as taking the square root. Either one of those ways will work. Here's a third way. I can break that up a little bit. So I could say C equals math.pow a comma 2, that's going to be a squared, plus math.pow b comma 2, that's going to be b squared, and then take that value of c and find the square root of that and reassign that to c. A third way to do it. You could combine those two lines into one statement if you wanted. So there's multiple ways to get to the correct result using variations of code. And you're going to find that's always true in working in a C# project. Your code will be different from somebody else's code. You will think a little bit differently. You will use different processes. And over the course of time, those processes for you may change. I'm a much better programmer today than I was 5 years ago because I've learned little tricks of the trade, and I've also learned to make my code maybe a little more concise. For now, the bottom line is, does it function? That's what you should be concerned about. We're going to create a C# project named Triangle Calculator. We're going to import a graphic from Canvas, and we're going to have text boxes. The user can enter the two sides. We'll have another text box, or it could be a label. In this case, I used a text box and made it read-only. And I want to calculate what is the value of C. I'd also like to know what is the area of our triangle. And that's going to be a times b times 1/2. And what's the perimeter? And that's going to be side A plus side B plus side C. And I'm going to have a button that will calculate all those values. So in this case, if we have 4 as side A and 3 as side B, we get 5.00 for side C. 6 is my area. 4 times 3 is 12 divided by 2 is 6, so I can take 4 times 3 times 0.5. And then the perimeter is going to be 4 plus 3 plus 5 is 12. I'm going to put in 8. I'm going to double these values, 8 and 6. Our side C then is 10. Our area is 24. 8 times 6 is 48, divided by 2 is 24. And then our perimeter, 8 plus 6 plus 10 gives us 24 as well. In all these cases, I've rounded these off to 2 decimal places. And if I did something like this, I'd get fairly long decimal numbers, but I have formatted these using that N2 option with toString to round these off at 2 decimal places. So I'm going to walk you through the creation of this project. Before we get into Visual Studio to create our project, we need to download an image from our Canvas course site. So log into Canvas, and in the modules area, if you go down to Unit 2, Variables in Math, we're going to scroll down a little bit, and you will find the triangle2.png. You can click on that to display the image. You can either choose Download, or you can also just right-click and choose Save Image As. Either way, we're going to download it to our computer, and we'll bring that into Visual Studio. So then in Visual Studio, we're going to create a new project. We're going to do a Windows Form app. I'm going to call this one 02 Triangle Calculator. Choose where you want to have it saved and click Create. So here's our project. We've got our form. I'm going to change the text of the form to be Triangle Calculator so that shows up on our title bar. And I'm going to start by bringing in a picture box. I'm going to set the size of that picture box. I'm going to drag my properties panel over here. I'm going to set the size. I know the size of my image is 252, 333. And I'll position that kind of where I want it. I'm also going to bring in the image. So I'll import my image, go find where I saved it, and say OK. And this is a PNG with a transparent background. So whatever your background color is, your form, it'll look like it's placed right on the form itself. I'm going to create a label. I want the text of my label to simply say side A. And then I will add a text box. We're going to name the text box TXT side A. I'm going to change the back color and give it a light yellow. And I'm going to change the font to 12 point. And let's give it a default value of 4.0, and I like to align my numbers to the right, so I'm going to change the text line property to right. And I'll again just kind of position things kind of in the center there. I'm going to select the label and the text box, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. We'll put the copy down here below our triangle image. We'll change the label to side B. I'm going to change the text of that new text box to be 3.0. And let's name that text box TXT side B. And I capitalize the S and the B so we have the camel case. I'm going to paste one more time. Control V. Let's put these over here on top of our picture box so it's going to show where the hypotenuse is. And again, I'm going to select the label, change that text to side C. Now you notice I'm not naming my labels because I'm not going to refer to the labels in code, so I don't need to name them. They can stay label 1, label 2, label 3. But the text box here I do want to rename. Something a little more meaningful, TXT side C. I'm going to change the color back to white. I'm going to make this read only so the user can't enter into it. So setting the read only property to true. And since we want to calculate this, we don't know what the value is, I'm just going to put a question mark there as the text. Okay, I'm going to move my panel over a little bit. I'm simply going to copy that text box and label, paste. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to move my label over, change the text of that to say area with a colon. Move that over to the left. I'm going to take this text box and rename it TXT. Area. And then again, I'm going to copy those two, paste. It saves me having to move that label from the top to the left-hand side. We're going to set the text of this label to perimeter. And this text box I will name TXT perimeter. One last thing, I'd like to have a button. So I'll select my button control. I'm going to drag a button over here. The text of the button, let's just go ahead and name the button here first. It's going to be BTN Calc, C-A-L-C. And the text will be calculate values. Okay, so there then is my form, and I'm actually going to change this a little bit up. I'm going to bring these over, just kind of tighten things up a little bit, and move my form a little further to the left. Okay, so there is our interface. We need to calculate those three values when the user clicks on this button. So now we're going to code. I'm going to double click on the button to give the click event. So btn calc underscore click, it creates the stub. I just need to create the code inside that event handler. So I'm going to start by using some double variables, and we're going to simply name A, B, and C since those are our three sides. Not really meaningful names, but in this case they are kind of meaningful. And then I also want a variable for area and another for my perimeter. I'm going to call it perim with my semicolon. So I've declared all five. I get green squigglies under them because they're not used elsewhere in code. The green squigglies are simply a warning saying, hey, you created a variable, but you haven't used it. Are you sure you really need this variable? Well, we're going to use those variables, so those will go away as we code. We're going to start by getting our input. Okay, so A equals, I want to take txt side A dot text. Now remember, that is a string value, A is a double value, so I need to convert that. So in front of txt side A, I'm going to add double dot parse to convert the string to a double value, and then my string has to go inside of parentheses, and I do a semicolon to complete that line. You notice our squiggly went away from A. We've now used that value. Do the same thing for B. I'll just go ahead and code this as double dot parse. And here we're going to take txt side B dot text and my semicolon. C then is going to equal the square root of a squared plus b squared. So we use math dot square root. And what I want here is a times a plus b times b. And with the order of precedence, the multiplication will happen first. This becomes a squared plus b squared. Another way I could have written this would have been math.pow a comma 2 plus math.pow b comma 2. Either way would work. Okay, so now we have the value of c. My area then, actually I'm going to put a comment in here that I kind of left out, that this is the process portion. So we're going to process the calculations. Area simply equals a times b. I can either divide all that by 2 or simply multiply that by 1/2 or 0.5. That's going to give me the area. And the perim is going to equal a plus b plus c. Okay, those are my processes in terms of determining our three values of c, area, and perim. Now I need to output those. So I'll put a comment here that we are doing output. txt side c. I want to change the text property of that control. Equals, that's going to be the value of c, but remember c is a double value. I need to convert that to a string, and I can do so with toString. And if I then go inside the parentheses and put in quotes n2, that will round off that value to 2 decimal places. Do the same thing for txt area. Changing the text property equals area dot toString, and again we'll do n2. Need my semicolon, and then finally txt perimeter dot text equals. Take the perim variable, that's a double. I'm going to convert it to a string and round that off to 2 decimal places, and my semicolon. So there is my code that handles the input from the user, processes the math, and displays the output. Let's test it. So I'm going to click the calculate values. I get 5.00 as side C, 6 is the area, 12 is the perimeter. And as we saw earlier, if I change these values, doubling them to 8 and 6, we should get 10, 24, and 24. And that's exactly what we get. That is the Triangle Calculator project.